He unclipped his badge from his white coat, set it on the counter beside the envelope without ceremony, and picked up the small cardboard box someone had quietly prepared. His surgical compass, 3 photographs, and a worn Navy challenge coin that had traveled to 3 combat deployments and found its way home every time. He walked out without another word. Lily was waiting in the hallway the way she always waited. Backpack on, sneakers tied, dark braids pinned neat at the sides of her head. 9 years old and patient in the particular way of a child who has spent years waiting outside hospital corridors. She had a paperback open on her knees, but she looked up the moment she heard his footsteps. She saw the box. She saw his face. She closed the book and stood up. Marcus took her hand, and together they walked out of the Meridian Cardiac Institute into the fierce Houston morning. Dr. Marcus Webb carried himself with the kind of quiet that comes from years of learning when to speak and when to let the work do the talking. He was a vascular and cardiothoracic surgeon, the kind that other surgeons called when the case stopped making sense. His hands had a reputation. In the operating room, he moved with the measured economy of a man who had long ago internalized the cost of wasted motion. In the places where he'd learned to operate, that cost was measured in lives, not hours. For 8 years before civilian medicine, Marcus had been a flight surgeon with the United States Navy. Not the kind of flight surgeon who sat behind a desk reviewing medical clearances. The kind who flew, who operated in the back of moving aircraft over open water, over desert, over the kind of terrain that doesn't appear on civilian maps. He had performed emergency thoracic procedures at altitude. He had repaired a femoral artery rupture while a helicopter crew fought 40-knot crosswinds. He had been decorated 3 times, and he had never mentioned it in a job interview. He left the Navy not because he was finished, but because of the night off the coast of Bahrain when everything went wrong at once. A training exercise had become a mass casualty event in under 4 minutes. 7 sailors. Marcus had saved 4. The other 3, he had held their hands and made the calls that no human being is designed to make, triaging survival odds in real time because the portable bypass unit had failed. Improperly serviced. A logistical oversight. 3 men dead who should have been breathing. The Navy's investigation cleared Marcus on every count. The maintenance failure was documented, the accountability assigned elsewhere. But Marcus could not clear himself. He replayed those 4 minutes for 2 years, through the debriefs and the counseling and the commendation ceremony that felt like standing in the wrong room. He left the service not in disgrace, but carrying a grief that doesn't have a clean name. He came to Houston for a fresh start, and he came for Lily, 5 years old when her mother left. Not from cruelty, but from the accumulated weight of loving a man whose first obligation would always be the next patient. Marcus had understood. He raised Lily alone, and he was good at it, in the particular way that a man who has learned to be effective under pressure is good at the things he commits to. The Meridian Cardiac Institute had recruited him aggressively. Houston's premier private cardiac surgery center, the kind of institution that attracted patients who flew in from 4 states for a second opinion, the kind whose name carried weight in referrals and reputation. It was a good job. It was supposed to be the anchor. Diana Crane had been appointed chief operating officer 14 months ago, and the friction began at the first budget meeting. Diana was not incompetent. She was organized, methodical, and entirely focused on one variable: margin. She viewed the institute as a high-performing financial instrument that happened to deliver medical services. Marcus viewed it as the last barrier between a human being and death. He had spent 8 months flagging aging equipment, raising staffing shortfalls, escalating deferred maintenance with the calm, documented persistence of a man who has watched systems fail and knows exactly what the warning signs look like. In meeting after meeting, he presented data, clean, sourced, peer-reviewed. In meeting after meeting, Diana responded with a spreadsheet. The breaking point was the CardioMax perfusion system, the Institute's primary intra-aortic support unit, the machine responsible for maintaining cardiac and circulatory stability during the most complex procedures, was 9 years old. It had been flagged twice in the past year for irregular pressure calibration. Marcus had pulled the service logs himself, read every entry, and built a case so airtight it barely needed presenting. He submitted the request in writing. Replace the CardioMax unit at a cost of $1.4 million. He attached 3 separate failure reports and cited 2 peer-reviewed studies linking aging perfusion equipment to adverse surgical outcomes. He sent it through the proper channels and waited. Diana denied it. She categorized it as a discretionary capital expense and noted with bureaucratic evenness that the machine had not yet caused a patient incident. "It hasn't caused one yet," Marcus had said in that final meeting, his voice controlled and flat. The register he used when he was choosing words very carefully. The register that other people sometimes misread as coldness and that was actually precision. "That's not a safety standard, that's just luck." Diana had characterized his persistence as insubordination. He had left the meeting knowing what was coming. The termination notice had been waiting for him the next morning. They stopped at the corner of Montrose and Westheimer, 2 blocks from Herman Park, to buy water from a convenience store. The city hummed around them. Traffic, a radio from a food truck down the block, the distant laugh of someone on a phone call. Lily walked beside him, occasionally stepping onto his shadow, a game she had invented when she was 6, a small way of staying close without asking for it. Marcus always pretended not to notice and secretly found it one of the more stabilizing things in his life. He was already running the numbers. Mortgage, car note, Lily's school tuition, which he would not touch regardless of what else had to flex. Health insurance. The figures assembled themselves in his head with the same efficient brutality he applied to surgical planning, and they were not catastrophic, not yet, but the window was narrow. Maybe 90 days before real pressure arrived. He handed Lily her water and stood on the sidewalk in the heat, trying to let himself be still inside it for a moment. That was when the sound started. It began as a vibration, a low, rhythmic thudding he felt in his chest before he heard it clearly. He'd know that frequency anywhere. Rotor blades under heavy load, moving fast. Not a news helicopter, not a medevac responding to a traffic incident. The cadence was wrong for that, too deliberate, too heavy. Blades beating with the urgent, purposeful weight of a machine that has somewhere critical to be. His head came up. His body went still. Lily noticed immediately. She stopped stepping on his shadow. "Dad?" Marcus scanned south. He spotted them a few seconds later. 2 dark shapes moving low over the downtown skyline in a tight formation that spoke of military coordination. The lead aircraft touched first, its wheels compressing into the grass with the full weight of the machine and everything inside it. The rear ramp dropped before the rotors had finished slowing. A figure jumped out, a young naval officer in service khakis, his face tight with the specific controlled urgency of someone carrying information that cannot wait. He bypassed the paramedic unit arriving at the park entrance. He bypassed the police cruiser pulling up at the curb. He scanned the gathering crowd of onlookers with the precision of a man who has been given a description and needs to match it, fast. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Is there a Dr. Webb here? We need Dr. Marcus Webb, right now!" The words cut through the engine noise and the crowd noise and landed somewhere specific, on the chest of a man standing at the park's edge holding a cardboard box and a water bottle. Marcus went absolutely still. His name, out here, called like that, with the particular military cadence that means this is not a request, this is a situation. People in the crowd turned, looking around. A few turned toward Marcus, who was conspicuous in scrubs under an open jacket, holding a box that made no sense in any civilian context. Behind him, running footsteps. He glanced back without turning his whole body. Diana Crane was coming from the direction of the Institute, flanked by 2 administrators, her blazer open, her professional composure stretched thin over something underneath it that was plainly fear. She saw the helicopters, she saw the officer, and then she saw Marcus standing at the edge of the park, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically, not cinematically, just quietly, the way a person's face changes when they realize they have made a mistake they cannot take back. The officer had already spotted Marcus and was closing the distance with focused speed, threading through the crowd like a man who doesn't slow down until the objective is reached. Lily's hand tightened around Marcus's fingers. "Daddy," she said quietly, looking up, "that man is looking for you." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the Navy Challenge coin, smooth, worn, the engraved anchor catching the morning light, and pressed it into Lily's palm. He closed her fingers around it. She held it and looked up at him with those dark, steady eyes that had always understood more than a 9-year-old should have to. The officer reached him in under a minute, snapping a salute that was pure reflex, the automatic recognition of rank that persists even without a uniform. "Dr. Webb, sir. Lieutenant Commander Reyes, Naval Medical Command. We have a critical patient. Offshore platform worker, Gulf of Mexico incident. Explosion and partial structural collapse on a deep-water rig approximately 60 miles out. Male, 38. Severe blast trauma, crush injury to the chest and upper abdomen. He's been in 62-degree water for 25 minutes. Field team has him on a ventilator and stabilized, but the window is closing." Marcus was already listening at a different depth than a civilian would. He was triaging the information in real time, building the medical picture, filling in the spaces between Reyes's words with what he knew about blast injuries and cold water immersion, and the specific way hypothermia hides what it's doing. "What's the surgical obstruction?" "Shrapnel fragmentation in the pericardial region. Compound rib fractures with suspected aortic wall compromise. The hypothermia is masking his true hemorrhagic rate. He's not presenting as critically as he is. We can't take him to a conventional OR. Transport time to a level 1 center on land is 38 minutes, and he won't make that window intact." Reyes paused. "We need intervention in the air, sir, during transport." He held Marcus's gaze without flinching. "Your Navy record documents 12 successful surgical procedures in non-sterile mobile environments, including 2 involving active thoracic hemorrhage during flight. You are the only surgeon within range whose clearances and documented field experience match this specific injury profile. We ran the registry. There is no one else in Houston who can do this. You're it, doctor." Marcus did not look at Diana Crane. He didn't need to. But Diana was looking at him. She had arrived at the edge of the crowd just in time to hear most of what Reyes had said. In time to see the officer saluting the man she had dismissed 2 hours ago for being an inconvenient line item. The math was doing itself without her permission. 14 months of budget meetings, 8 months of Marcus Webb's documented requests, equipment flags, staffing concerns, maintenance escalations, all reviewed, all filed, all answered with margin rationale. 8 months of a black surgeon using clean, peer-reviewed evidence to argue that the system was heading toward failure, and 8 months of her categorizing those arguments as a personality problem. The officer's words were rearranging everything. "We need Dr. Marcus Webb. Not a vascular surgeon, not whoever's available. Marcus Webb, by name. Because of a record she hadn't fully read, because of a history she'd acknowledged as a resume line and moved past. She had not understood what she was managing. She understood now, standing in a public park in August, watching a naval officer wait for a man she had just terminated to decide what to do. Marcus turned to Lily. He knelt in the grass, right there, rotor wash still settling around them, and looked his daughter directly in the eye. Lily had both hands around the challenge coin, her thumbs moving across the anchor engraving. "I have to go," he said. His voice was quiet and completely steady. "There is a man who needs help that I'm the only one who can give right now. I'll be back in about 90 minutes. You stay right here on that bench. Miss Chen is going to sit with you." He glanced at one of the nurses who had followed the crowd from the institute, a woman he trusted with the specific, quiet trust of people who have worked together in high-pressure rooms. She stepped forward without being asked. Lily was looking at him with the expression she always got when she was deciding whether to accept something or push back on it. The full calculation visible on her face for exactly 2 seconds. Then she reached her own conclusion, the way she always did. She had one more question. She asked it the way she asked hard things, directly, looking straight at him, no softening. "Did they fire you for doing the right thing?" Marcus was quiet for one beat. "Yes," he said, "they did." Lily nodded once, the nod of someone confirming a theory they had been running quietly for some time. He kissed her forehead. He stood up. He turned toward the helicopter and walked. "What's his core temperature on the last reading?" Marcus said before the ramp was even fully up. 33.2 Celsius, approximately 14 minutes ago, Reyes said, keeping pace beside him. "Blood pressure trend?" "Systolic holding at 91, but inconsistent. The hypothermia is suppressing his pain response. He's not registering the distress his body is actually in. Which means the internal hemorrhage is worse than the monitors are showing." "That's our concern, yes, sir." "Get me the imaging they pulled on the rig. I want to see the chest films before we're over water." The ramp sealed behind them. The engines climbed in pitch. The Seahawk lifted hard and fast, tilting forward, banking south toward the Gulf of Mexico. And Marcus Webb was no longer the man who had carried a cardboard box out of an administrative office that morning. He was the surgeon they called when the system ran out of options. A naval Seahawk in medical configuration is not an operating room. It is a space roughly the size of a cargo van's interior, vibrating at every frequency simultaneously, lit by adjustable tactical LEDs with equipment bolted to the walls and a patient strapped to a litter in the center. The noise is constant. Engine, rotor, wind. A mechanical presence that never stops. The aircraft moves. The floor tilts and corrects and tilts again. Nothing is ever entirely still. This was Marcus Webb's operating room for the next 54 minutes. He stood over the patient, a big man, heavy-built, the body of someone who had spent a decade doing physical work on offshore platforms, and spent 30 seconds simply looking at him, reading him. The chest films were on a portable imaging viewer, and Marcus studied them with the focused attention of someone reading a language only a handful of people in the world are genuinely fluent in. The shrapnel fragmentation was there. 2 pieces, sitting in the pericardial tissue with the particular stillness of metal that has not yet decided to move. One was positioned close to the right coronary artery, dangerously close, the kind of proximity that turns a transport into a countdown. Every vibration, every altitude shift, every banking correction a potential trigger. "Pilot," Marcus said into the headset. His voice was even, the tone of a man making a structural request, not issuing alarm. "I need you to hold below 1,200 feet for the duration of this procedure. Altitude changes will affect his pressure differential in ways I cannot correct for surgically. Can you maintain that?" "Copy that, Doctor. 1,200 feet, holding. I also need your banking angles under 15 degrees when possible. Talk to me before any correction more than 10 degrees. I'll be working in a confined space and I need to move with you, not against you." "Understood, Doctor." Marcus turned to the medic across the litter, a woman composed, her eyes steady and professional above her mask. "Name," he said. "Petty Officer First Class Yvonne Torres, sir." "Torres. You've done field surgical assist before?" "Twice, sir. Both cardiac-adjacent procedures." "Good. You are my second pair of hands for the next hour. Do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you, without question or delay. If I say stop, you freeze. If I say go, you go. If you see something I haven't mentioned, you say it once, clearly. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Marcus pulled on gloves, opened the trauma kit, and began. What happened over the Gulf of Mexico in the next 54 minutes was not something that appears in any surgical training manual. It was the kind of medicine that gets taught only by the particular combination of experience, necessity, and refusal to accept the limits of the environment. The kind of competence that looks like improvisation from the outside, but is actually a very deep library of solutions being accessed at high speed. The first challenge was access. Reaching the pericardial region in a moving aircraft through compound rib fractures without a surgical table or a proper retractor system. Marcus improvised with the equipment at hand, using a modified rib-spreading technique he had developed on his 3rd deployment, working with the aircraft's movement patterns rather than against them. timing his incisions between the helicopter's rhythmic corrections, finding the steadiness inside the vibration. The hypothermia was the second problem. The patient's low core temperature was suppressing his hemorrhagic presentation. His body cold enough that the bleeding appeared controlled when it wasn't. His vital signs polite and deceptive. Marcus recognized the deception and countered it, warming the IV fluids, accelerating his timeline to address the deeper vascular compromise before the rewarming process revealed the full extent of what was underneath. The shrapnel fragments could not be removed. Not here, not in a moving aircraft, not without the imaging support of a proper surgical suite. What Marcus could do, what only Marcus could do in this specific configuration of constraints, was stabilize the tissue around them, create a temporary structural integrity that would hold through the remainder of transport, through the rewarming, through the 60-minute window before a Level 1 surgical team could take over with full resources. Torres was exceptional. She anticipated his next request twice without being told, which Marcus registered without comment. At 31 minutes, the patient's blood pressure began to climb. At 42 minutes, his oxygen saturation crossed 92 and held. At 53 minutes, Marcus placed the final temporary suture, secured the drain, and straightened up. His back ached. His hands were completely steady. "Pilot, this is Dr. Webb. We are post-procedure. Patient is stabilized for transport. Take us to Methodist Cardiac. They'll have a thoracic suite ready. Alert their team that I'll need 4 minutes with the lead surgeon before they open him up. There are pericardial specifics they need from me directly." "Copy, doctor. Methodist Cardiac ETA 16 minutes. Torres was looking at him with the expression he recognized from the best medics he had worked with. The particular respect of someone who has just seen something they didn't know was possible. "I've assisted 2 of these, sir," she said, her voice quiet under the engine noise. "I've never seen anyone work like that." Marcus stripped off the outer gloves and reached for a clean pair. "How's his color?" he said. Torres looked at the man on the litter. "Better," she said. "A lot better." Marcus nodded once. That was the only review that mattered. Back in Herman Park, Lily sat on the bench where her father had left her. Miss Chen sat beside her, had gently offered a granola bar, which Lily had politely declined without taking her eyes off the southern sky. Lily was holding the Navy Challenge coin flat against her sternum with both hands, the way people hold things they are keeping safe for someone. The crowd had thinned to the people who had no particular reason to leave, a scatter of the Institute's nursing staff, a few bystanders who had pulled out their phones, a television news crew that had arrived about 10 minutes after the helicopters lifted off and was now setting up with the slightly awkward energy of people who have arrived at a story mid-sentence and are trying to catch up. Diana Crane stood slightly apart from the Institute group. She had not moved more than 20 feet from where she'd been standing when the Seahawks lifted off. One of her administrators had tried twice to speak to her about operational matters, and both times she had answered with words that didn't form a useful sentence. Eventually, the administrator stopped trying. Diana was engaged in a different kind of accounting. 8 months of meeting notes, 8 months of Marcus Webb's documented requests, the equipment flags, the staffing concerns, the maintenance escalations, all received, all filed, all addressed with margin rationale and financial projections that felt, right now, like documents written in a language she no longer fully understood. 8 months of a black surgeon providing clear, evidence-based arguments that the system was moving toward failure, and 8 months of her treating those arguments as insubordination because they were expensive, and he was insistent, and she had a board presentation at the end of every quarter. The officer's voice was still in her head, the way things get into your head when they land at the right angle. "We need Dr. Marcus Webb, not a cardiothoracic surgeon, not whoever you have available. The name, specific, urgent." The name of the man she had signed the termination notice for that morning. She had read his CV when he was hired. She had noted the Navy service, the deployments, the decorations. She had processed it the way you process a resume line that doesn't affect the quarterly budget. She had moved on. She hadn't understood what she was looking at. She understood it now, standing in a park in August, watching a 9-year-old girl hold a coin against her chest with both hands and stare at the southern sky with the absolute, unquestioning faith of a child who has never had a reason to doubt her father. Diana walked over to the bench. Lily looked up at her without particular expression. The clear, unafraid look of a child who knows who the adults are in any room and has already made her assessments. Diana crouched down to eye level. It was an awkward gesture for a woman in a business blazer, but she made it anyway. "Your dad is very good at what he does," she said. It was all she had. Lily considered this for a moment. "I know," she said simply, and looked back at the sky. Diana straightened up. She walked back to her spot and stood there, waiting like everyone else. 14 minutes. Then the sound started again. Low at first, then rising. The rhythmic thud of rotor blades climbing into the familiar mechanical roar that the crowd in the park had now heard twice today and recognized immediately. Faces turned south almost in unison. The two Seahawks appeared over the tree line, descending in tight formation, making their final approach to the same stretch of flattened grass. The crowd stirred back into movement. The news crew repositioned. The nursing staff pressed forward. Lily stood up from the bench. She was holding the challenge coin pressed flat against her chest with both hands, her face turned toward the aircraft, completely still. The lead helicopter touched down. The ramp dropped. The man who walked down it was recognizable by his shape, his height, his particular way of moving, the measured stride that never rushes and never idles. But something about him was different now. His surgical shirt was marked with the evidence of the past hour. He moved with the specific exhaustion of a body that has operated at its absolute limit and then stepped carefully back from the edge. Not broken, not defeated, but fully spent in the way that comes after a thing that mattered. He looked like someone who had won the most important argument of his life without saying a single word about it. Lily did not wait for the security line. She went straight through the remaining crowd, sneakers hitting the grass, braids flying, 9 years old and completely certain, and closed the distance in 4 seconds. Marcus dropped to one knee and caught her. She buried her face against his shoulder, her arms locked around his neck, and he held her with both arms, completely, without reservation, the embrace of a man who had come back from somewhere difficult and was not going to pretend otherwise. The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then the applause started. Not organized, not cued by anyone, just the spontaneous sound of people who have been watching something real and want to mark it. The nursing staff began it. Security joined in. The news crew captured it. It rose into the park in the August heat, genuine and undeniable. Nobody in that crowd was thinking about quarterly margins. Commander Reyes stepped forward. His voice carried the formal precision of someone making a statement for the record, one that would be logged and filed and, he clearly intended, heard. Dr. Marcus Webb performed emergency thoracic surgery in a moving aircraft at altitude today, stabilizing a critically injured patient who would not have survived a conventional transport timeline. His intervention is directly responsible for that man's survival. He paused. On behalf of Naval Medical Command, Dr. Webb, thank you for your service, today and every time before today. The applause rose again, fuller this time. The entire Institute staff was present, every administrator, every nurse, every person who had been in a meeting where Marcus Webb had been characterized as a difficult employee was standing in a park watching a naval officer thank him in public for doing exactly what he had always said he was trained to do. Diana Crane was at the back of the administrative cluster. She moved forward. She moved through the group deliberately, not around it. A choice that cost her something visibly, and she made it anyway. She stopped in front of Marcus, in front of her staff, in front of the news camera that was absolutely recording this. "Dr. Webb," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Not performing steadiness, just not quite steady. "The CardioMax unit is being replaced. I authorized the purchase order 40 minutes ago from my phone. Installation within the week." She paused. She didn't look away. "I was wrong. Not just about the equipment, about how I listened to you, about what I was measuring and what I wasn't. And I'm sorry. publicly, clearly, without the kind of qualifications that would make this easier for me to say. The park was quiet. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He was thinking, the way he always thought about things, carefully and without rushing, giving the moment the weight it had earned. "Thank you," he said finally, "for saying it in front of people." Dr. Raymond Hargrove, the Institute's chief of surgery, a gray-haired man who had been standing quietly at the back of the administrative group, watching everything with the careful attention of someone who had been in medicine long enough to know when a moment is historic, stepped forward. "Marcus." The first name was deliberate, a register shift. "We want you back. Permanent attending contract, full executive compensation, and formal clinical authority over equipment and safety standards. Your sign-off is required before any capital equipment decision that affects patient care protocols. Written into the contract." He let that land. "You set the floor. We enforce it." The crowd waited. Lily squeezed her father's hand. Marcus was quiet for a moment, not performing deliberation, actually thinking. Then he spoke, and his voice was level and clear and pitched to carry, because what he was saying was not for Hargrove alone. It was for everyone in that park who wore a badge or scrubs or a title from the Meridian Cardiac Institute. "I have conditions," he said. "The safety audit I submitted in February gets implemented, fully, not reviewed. Staffing ratios corrected within 30 days. All deferred maintenance on cardiac support equipment completed within 60 days. And the incident report for the CardioMax denial gets documented as an administrative safety failure. Not a policy disagreement, not a difference of professional opinion. A safety failure. It goes into the institutional record." He looked at Diana directly. "Not to punish anyone," he said, "to create the accountability that makes it harder to happen again." Diana nodded. Once. Slowly. The nod of a person who has stopped calculating the cost to herself and is choosing something different. Hargrove extended his hand. "Agreed. Every point. You have my word, and you'll have it in writing before end of business today." Marcus shook his hand. Then he turned to Lily. He took the challenge coin from her palm, looked at it for a moment, the worn anchor, the motto, and pressed it back into her hand. "Keep it," he said. "You earned that today." Lily looked at the coin. Then she looked up at him and smiled. The full, uncomplicated smile of a child who has been holding her breath for 90 minutes and can finally let it go. They walked home together, father and daughter, the way they had started the morning. The city was the same. Same heat, same traffic, same food truck on the corner of Montrose. But the weight Marcus carried was different now. The mortgage and the car note and the calculations were still there, but they had shifted into a shape that could be carried because it meant something. You can hold a weight differently when it belongs to something true. 2 Seahawks flew overhead as they rounded the last corner, heading south toward the Naval Air Station. Heading home, their mission complete. Lily watched them until they disappeared behind the downtown skyline. "Is that for you?" she asked. Marcus looked up. "That's just the Navy going home," he said. They watched until the last echo of the rotors dissolved into the city noise. Then they went inside. There are things that a job title cannot contain. Marcus Webb was a vascular surgeon, an attending physician, a contractor who had been terminated on a Tuesday morning and reinstated by Tuesday evening. But none of those categories were the thing the Naval Registry had encoded when they flagged his name as the only viable option. What they had encoded was something harder to categorize. The specific and irreplaceable combination of skill and experience and refusal that makes one person, in one specific moment, the only person. The one who was trained for exactly this scenario. The one who had refused to let the system forget what it was for. He had spent 8 months trying to tell an institution what it needed. The institution had not listened, until the consequence of its own inattention arrived in a public park and asked for him by name, in front of everyone. He had not waited to be proven right. He had refused to be silent about what was true. And then, when the moment asked for everything he had given it. Not for vindication, not for the people who had dismissed him, but because a man 60 miles out over the Gulf needed the best surgeon available, and Marcus Webb was the best surgeon available. That's the only math that mattered to him. There is a kind of person in every institution, in every organization, every hospital, every workplace, who sees the fault line before it opens, who documents it, who presents it with evidence and argues for it and absorbs the friction of being inconvenient and shows up again the next day and does it again. That person is frequently dismissed, managed out, characterized as difficult. But when the fault line opens, and it always opens, they are the ones who get called. Lily kept the challenge coin on her nightstand. She would tell people when she was older that the day her father was fired was the day she understood that being right is not the same as being heard, and that being heard is not the same as being safe, but that some people refuse to stop being right anyway, and that changes things. Not always, not automatically, not without cost, but sometimes the world corrects itself, imperfectly, belatedly, in a public park with a news crew and a naval officer and an administrative director who finally runs out of spreadsheet. Sometimes the person who stood their ground in the morning is the same person who walks home in the evening, holding their daughter's hand. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that's enough. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment. We'll keep telling them. The moment you speak a difficult truth and the room goes cold, that moment is not your failure. It may be the most important thing you do all year. Every system that has ever harmed someone through neglect was warned first. Someone filed the report. Someone raised the flag. Someone said, in a meeting or a hallway or a carefully worded email, "This is going to go wrong," and was told in one way or another to be quiet about it. Marcus Webb was not a hero because he saved a man over the Gulf. He was a hero because he refused for 8 months to pretend the fault line wasn't there. The helicopter was just the moment the world caught up to what he already knew. Your integrity is not a liability. Your willingness to say the uncomfortable true thing, to document it, to stand in the meeting and say it again. That is the thing that cannot be replaced. It cannot be hired back in a hurry. It cannot be summoned by a purchase order once the emergency is already in the air. Whatever you are protecting right now, in your workplace, your family, your community, keep protecting it, even when it costs you something, especially then.